We are back for another episode of the Ruling on the Field podcast. My name is Seth, and like always, I'm with my host, my big brother, Sam. And let's dive right into it. There's a lot that we got to cover here. Some very interesting games, some upsets, some surprises. But I think let's start across the border with the international game, the first game on the Sunday slate. Kansas City versus Tyreek Hill, the rematch of Tyreek Hill versus former team. This maybe wasn't the game that people were expecting. This two high power offenses. Definitely, I thought it was going to hit the over. It did not, but it still came down to the wire. It's still a very close, competitive game, and all around the atmosphere in Germany was fantastic. What was your thoughts of that game?
Yeah, I mean, they were singing Country Home, John Denver song, 30, 40. Country Roads, Country Home, Take Me Home. Country Roads, John Denver song, 30,000, 40,000 people there. It was incredible, the atmosphere. I mean, this is, again, remember, a game that the Chiefs chose, the Chiefs chose to have in Germany so that Tyreek Hill wouldn't be booed in Arrowhead. Something that I think is just weird. I think we were kind of talking about it a little bit, last podcast about how we thought it would be such a great time for him to go back. I saw Tyreek and head coach Andy Reid before the game having a nice little chat, a little moment. Tyreek was on a podcast a few weeks back talking about how he was done, like a done deal in Kansas City. They were going to give him all that guaranteed money. And then something kind of happened as the agent was pushing for a little bit more, and then the numbers just weren't there. So Miami, New York reached out. He ended up going to Miami, and he's just had an amazing run over the last 2 years. I was surprised at the low-scoring game, too. I mean, obviously, when we think of the Kansas City Chiefs and we think about those lateral plays, we think of that Kelsey catching like a quick button hook and then lateraling it to a tight end. The play of the week almost, in my opinion, was that defensive play where the Tyreek caught a quick screen and he made a football play. He had 2 steps, and then they knocked the ball out. It was a fumble. And as Tyreek's bringing down Mike Edwards, he passes it over to the rookie, and the rookie just runs down the field and goes for the touchdown. It was a scoop and score, but it was a scoop, lateral, and score. That was the defining play of the game. I mean, when you look at it, it was all a defensive game. I mean, they held Miami scoreless in the first half. This is the highest scoring team in the league, right? Mike McDaniel, everything. They had a little bit cooking in the second half, but I mean, this is a Chiefs defense, I think, Seth, that can actually be the catalyst for the Chiefs to go back to back. It's not their offense. When I saw this game, Mahomes didn't have that big playability. They double, triple team Travis Kelsey, forcing him to throw to guys like Rashee Rice and Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Sky Moore. Jarrett McKinnon caught a touchdown. Rashee Rice caught a touchdown. There were the other guys that were being elevated because Kelsey was blanketed, and that's what teams are going to do. It seems such an easy thing in the game plan. Blanket Travis Kelsey and make them beat you in other ways, but Kelsey still finds ways. Whatever Miami did, though, might be a blueprint going forward, but I really think, and I wanted to get your thoughts, Seth, Chiefs defense, top 5, top 3, maybe even the top defense in the league. George Karlaftis, I believe his name is, or Chris Jones.
Yeah, they've got a few.
Look up the name, players. But he's up there in sacks. I was just looking at it at how good he is. The Chiefs have a few guys. George Karlaftis. Anyways, I apologize.
Hard name to say.
Great
player on the field.
He's got 6 sacks. They've got another guy, Mike Dannon, who's got 6 sacks. They are playing great, and ultimately that secondary, the young guys, really stepping up. And I think that defense is going to be the big story for the Chiefs moving forward.
Yeah, I think ever since Coach Spagnuolo has been in that locker room, they've had a swagger to them. And, year after year, the Chiefs have been, known for this, having what is probably very easy to say the best quarterback in the game right now in Patrick Mahomes. But their defense has held true with a lot of these top offenses in many of the games, even in those high scoring bouts with Buffalo in the playoffs and even the last Super Bowl where, yes, it came down to who scored last, but there were big plays that the defense made in the right moments. And this defense has always had that identity. This is also, keep in mind, Nick Bolton's hurt too, who's one of their cornerstone players. So definitely was a great sign on their defense. I think McDuffie has looked amazing this season. Really, he's looking like one of the like a huge progression in his career from where he was last year. So that's very exciting if you're a Chiefs fan.
If they had that most improved award like they do in NBA, I think McDuffie would be a big candidate for, in my opinion, and yours too, of taking that huge leap from just an okay cornerback to being a real shutdown guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's definitely set the tone for the secondary, which is probably the weakest part of their defense, but he's been a huge component to, their success that we're seeing. And, Tyreek Hill, they were really trying to get him into these plays as much as they could, and they just couldn't find a way to really get into the end zone and find any success. And it's interesting how these international games, they've had pretty good matchups on paper with these offenses that could score more, but we're not seeing these high scoring games. And, obviously when you're traveling across the seas and your whole routine gets changed, and we've talked about this a lot in other podcast episodes, like it is a big difference, but at the end of the day, it was still a really exciting game. I saw a stat that the Kansas City Chiefs became the first team ever to win 4 different countries, which is an incredible stat. They've obviously in America, it's America's game, Mexico, England, and now Germany.
Big ones against the Rams, that high scoring 100-point game. That was the Mexico one, right?
Right. That was Mexico.
That was one of the best games I've ever seen, like a regular season game wise. And then, England and now Germany. So pretty cool stat. And just another couple quick things on the Chiefs defense. They're ranked second in points against, giving up 15.9. And it seems like, Mahomes can get you to 17, no problem, unless you bet on him against the Denver Broncos 2 weeks ago, which, I did. And that was a huge disappointment, but he usually gets to that because, they're averaging like 23.1. So if you're averaging 23 points and you're giving up 16, you're going to win 99.9% of the time, especially statistically, right?
Like you've already won the game.
They're ranked 4th in total yards at 307.4. But I think the most impressive one to me is that they've only given them 176 passing yards per game. And you look at the quarterbacks they faced the last couple of weeks, Tua, Justin Herbert, like they've really neutralized these top quarterbacks who are able to throw the ball down the field. And they're doing it with, a secondary you said was their weakest point. Brian Cook was that rookie who I failed to mention when he got the lateral and returned it. But Brian Cook, Justin Reed, L'Jarius Sneed, Trent McDuffie, Mike Edwards, Jalen Watson, all these guys are playing, and everyone just knows their role. And I think that's really interesting because, you hear about that, especially with defensive schemes. And as a former cornerback, you can probably talk about you're going up against some matchups where it's tough to play man-to-man, especially if you're going up against the speed that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are able to bring. I know Jalen Waddle got hurt a little bit, but he did end up playing the rest of the game. Sometimes it's not even much about scheming. It's just about doing your job and knowing that you've got that defensive line pressure with Chris Jones. When Nick Bolton's there, they've got that great linebackers that really have a lot of speed and a lot of range. And the secondary just has to play their role. And it seems like everyone in Spagnuolo's defense has been doing that. And that's why they've had so much success. And that's why ultimately that game was a defensive game. Kudos to Miami for really struggling, help, Mahomes struggle a little bit in the second half. Didn't score any points. I don't remember last time Mahomes didn't score a single point in a half. And so that was really impressive by Miami. But that was what you get. And that's what you seem to be getting with these European games is low-scoring games.
We were talking here about, yes, the Dolphins defense having Jalen Ramsey back and Xavier Howard was very impressive, but we're now, this 9 weeks in, and as much as excitement and hype as there is with the Dolphins, they haven't won these big games. They haven't won any games that really would have shown me that they can be a contender. They lost to the Eagles, lost to the Chiefs, lost to the Bills, 3 contenders.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to talk a lot about the Bills later in this episode, but for all intents and purposes, those are 3 of the best teams or in the upper echelon tier of teams in the NFL. And the Dolphins have not been able to get those big victories. And I'm not saying this is a sign of what things to come, but winning these type of games is huge morale boost for the locker room, and losing these types of games starts to seep in a little bit of doubt. And if you're a Dolphins fan, not being able to win these games, and even though you're close in each one of them, you feel like you're missing that next piece. But it'll be interesting to see. There's still a whole lot of football to be played for those Dolphins.
Well, I'm talking about teams that should have won those big games and stepping up in those big moments. We all know what happened with the Dallas Cowboys last time they played on prime time. They got absolutely bamboozled by the San Francisco 49ers on the road. They played another one. It wasn't a Sunday nighter, but it was a primetime game, an NFC clash or an NFC East clash, but it was really an NFC clash between the Eagles and the Cowboys. I thought it was a great game. There was so many storylines. What was your biggest takeaway from the Cowboys falling short to the Eagles?
I would say my biggest takeaway is that CeeDee Lamb is just in the top 3 receivers for me right now. Like, wow. I think just the way that he's playing, the routes he runs, everything that he brings to the table is such a prototypical receiver. And I know there's some great receivers. I guess this is also
What's your top 3? Sorry, I gotta cut you off. What's your top 3? Who's your other 2? If you're playing,
well, I was just gonna say Justin Jefferson's been hurt, so that maybe he might have to. I might have to move CeeDee Lamb
for. And Tyreek. Are those the other?
I was gonna say Tyreek, Jamar.
You don't have AJ in that conversation.
I do have him in the conversation. I'm just saying. I think CeeDee Lamb has just definitely been a guy that's just sniffing his way into that top Mount Rushmore of receivers right now. And the chemistry that he has with Dak. Dak played probably his best game that I've seen him. Obviously, he fell short, but he got a lot of respect around the league in that loss, which is never something you want at the end of it is something you want, but my point that I was trying to get to is you always want to win the game. The respect thing is nice and it's an added bonus, but at the end of the day, you want to win the game, and when you fall short of that, it is bittersweet. But I think these Cowboys and Eagles matchups are always exciting. They're always down to the wire, always kind of high powered type of games. But I know you're obviously diehard Dallas Cowboys fan. If you're probably to choose any team in your division that you would enjoy beating the most, it would probably be the Philadelphia Eagles. You weren't able to get that this past Sunday. So how are you feeling? Are you okay?
Yeah, of course. I think the Eagles have a lot of tough games coming up still. I think the Cowboys have a nice little window where they got, my boy Danny DeVito, Tommy DeVito next week, minus 50.5. Put the life savings on the Cowboys money line. If they lose this game, the season's over. I don't care if they make the playoffs. They can't lose to the Giants with nobody playing next week. And Dallas, which the Cowboys now have the longest win streak at home going into this game. I know I'm not trying to jinx it, obviously, but with the 49ers losing to Jamar Chase and the Bengals and Joey B a couple weeks ago, Cowboys have an 11-game home win streak dating back to last year. We were actually at one of those games last year, Dallas-Indy, where Indy kept it close until this crazy fourth quarter where we just saw the unexplainable.
Don't remind me.
Yeah, I won't go down to it. I'll stick with the Cowboys and the Eagles game. It really was that game, and the old expression, it comes down to a game of inches. Luke Schoonmaker, the rookie tight end, catches the ball. He is getting brought down before he catches it. So there could be an argument that there could have been pass interference, but he's getting caught. He catches the ball at the 1 yard line. As he's going down, the ball is short. Like, the right call is that he was short. It was just, that's an inch there. Then there's Dak Prescott on the touchdown that he orchestrates, and they go all the way down the field. A great play. Then he goes for the 2-point conversion, and he gets it until you realize that he stepped out just a yard before that. They go down for that last play. They can kick a field goal with Brandon Aubrey, who's broken the rookie record for most consecutive kicks. I'm feeling really confident about him. Apparently, Brett Maher was obviously a huge big kicker for us for the last couple of years, and then just had the yips in the playoffs. And then now we've gone to this Aubrey guy. He probably would have made that. But then you go to the final drive, which was, 46 seconds, and we'll get to what CJ Stroud did in 46 seconds. Probably the most big drive of the year of his season. It was a huge play, and we'll get to that in a moment. But Dak got the ball down to a couple penalties from the Eagles down to the 5-yard line, and they couldn't score. There was a false start penalty. Then there was a sack. The one time you can take a sack is in that play with no timeouts. Then you go from trying to do a fake spike play. It doesn't really work. Then you're throwing pretty much a Hail Mary, and they hit CeeDee Lamb for like a 23-yard pass, and they fall 4 or 5 yards short, which was those 4 or 5 yards on the false start. And, by the way, they also got a delay of game, which I don't know who that's on. I really think it's on the quarterback at the end of the day. The coach maybe is trying to get the play in late, trying to send a second play, all these different things. But you cannot take a delay of game. And it just seems, and I'm just being honest, Cowboys fandom aside, when it comes to these little things like throwing a little play where you have, Ezekiel Elliott being the offensive lineman in the playoffs, is the only lineman, or sliding down with no timeouts and expecting to get one more play, like the small things from the last dozens of years, it feels like, have always come down to the Cowboys just not making the smart decisions and other teams doing it. And credit the Eagles. They struggled in the first half. Jalen Hurts got banged up right before the second quarter. They still found a way to get it done. And, that defense definitely is a problem. They definitely have some problems in the secondary, but they still got great weapons on the outside offensively and defensively. They got a great push from the defensive line. Hassan Reddick was coming up, Jalen Carter, the list goes on. So I don't know if it's as much about the Cowboys lost that game or if the Eagles won that game. I just think that these are a very good chance that these teams are going to meet more than just two times this year.
Yeah, you brought up this topic of decisions, and in the NFL, I mean, the game's 60 minutes long, where everything has decisions and counter decisions, and it's almost like a game of chess. But these decisions are also being made weeks before. Like their coaches and the staff are already thinking about all of these decisions, so it can be very hard to harp on those one decision that may have cost them, but they do matter. Every decision goes in and it does matter. And you to win these big games, it's, this idea of perfection is hard to strive for anyone, but as a team, as a unit, that's what you got to bring into the table when you play against these big games, against especially the division rival in Philadelphia, which is not an easy place, probably arguably one of the most hostile places in all of sports to play. So you're already battling through all of that you got to make sure your decisions and all those other things are on cue. But yeah, it seemed like, the Cowboys fell short again. This narrative, I know watching Cowboys with you as your brother, like it feels like, we're always like that an inch away. Like it seems like you're always.
I'll never forget the Tony Romo one.
Tony Romo, the Des Bryant, like the catch.
Yes.
Like that was heartbreaking. It changed the game.
I was going to say the Tony Romo against Seattle with the botched field goal.
Also, botched field goal.
Always the small things. And, again, just one point. You're talking about CeeDee Lamb taking that next echelon. A lot of people doubted him being in that top tier this year with the Jamar Chases and Justin Jeffersons of the world. I think he's proven more and more this year that he is that guy that he can be relied on. He runs great routes. He goes right into tackles. Like he's not afraid of the contact. And then on a critical fourth down late in the fourth quarter, they're throwing to Jalen Tolbert. Like, I know CeeDee Lamb's double covered, but I almost take my chances with that. Or, Jake Ferguson was having his best game of the year, and then went to Jalen Tolbert. Like, the decision-making sometimes just a little off. But I'll tell you someone who had decision-making going on, and we just talked about it a little bit before, C.J. Stroud. Seth, you've got him in fantasy. 5 touchdowns, breaks Luck's records for most passing yards in the first, handful of games. What are your thoughts on what we saw with C.J. Stroud? And how much of that was on him, and how much of that is just maybe the Buccaneers defense isn't good?
I'm not taking away anything of what CJ Stroud did. I watched that entire game. As you mentioned, he's my fantasy player. I've also felt that CJ Stroud was the best quarterback in this draft class. He was the most pro ready in terms of what he can do. He can throw the ball anywhere he wants on the field. He may not overwhelm you with this insane arm strength like you saw out of Anthony Richardson, or the same speed of Anthony Richardson. Like, he doesn't have these elite traits, but what he does and where he can place the ball from a precision standpoint is incredible. And nothing showed that more to me than in that drive. We were talking about it, 46 seconds. You have to get a touchdown. Field goal doesn't cover it. You have one timeout on this drive. Your first play gets a good gain, and then you see cover 2, and you throw this perfect 40-yard corner to Tank Dell that could not have been put in a better place. He might as well have just dropped it in Tank Dell's bucket, because it completely went right in between the coverage. It stopped the clock. It put you right in the red zone too. Everything about that play was elite. And I know this is one play out of what was just an incredible game, 470 yards. You mentioned 5 touchdowns, all of that highlights just the type of player that Houston Texans got. And as a Colts fan, I'm obviously excited to see the rivalry between him and Anthony Richardson as years goes on. But I know that CJ Stroud is going to be a baller for them. And especially with these young receiving core that, going into the season, we thought CJ Stroud doesn't have a lot of weapons. This offense might look a little anemic, but he's elevating everyone. Everyone is playing great. Dalton Schultz has become reliable, tight end, little red zone. It's not even Robert Woods that he's using. It's Nico Collins. It's Tank Dell, as I mentioned. Noah Brown, former Cowboy. So it's
Noah Brown and Dalton Schultz led the game. 2 former Cowboys from last year led the game, and Tank Dell also got 100-plus yards. But those 3 all had 100-plus yards. 2 of them former Cowboys in that game.
Well, they stayed in Texas and went to Houston, and they reaped the benefits of CJ Stroud throwing it to them. And yeah, I was very impressed. I was a little sad that Andrew Luck's record was broken, but records are meant to be broken. I think as a football fan, you want to see records being broken, and it was a treat to watch him put up that performance. I'm sure Houston was loving it. And yeah, Tampa Bay's defense definitely looks sus. You got to give a lot of credit for Baker. Baker also had a great 2-minute drive, did what he had to do, scored a touchdown. Like Baker's played well in Tampa Bay. Like he's really come into every game and tried to be competitive. Besides that game against Detroit, they've been mostly in every game. And what a game that I thought was going to hit the under went over 70 points and was just a wild one.
Well, just to let people know, Seth told me on Saturday that he liked the unders in a lot of games, and it was actually a lot of overs. So, he's now said that twice in the podcast. He might say it a third time, but he thought a lot of unders. But that game, definitely a lot of more points that we scored. The record, again, Andrew Luck's, what CJ did was 470 yards for the most single game passing yards by an NFL rookie. And yeah, I really thought, Rachaad White really stepped up for the Buccaneers. I thought their secondary and people like Ron DeBarber, who works on the Buccaneers radio call, was saying it's the worst secondary in the league. Carlton Davis and Sean Murphy Bunting, a lot of these guys banged up or just taking a step backwards. I don't know why, because you've associated the Bucs for the last handful of years, Levante David and Devin White as these guys who are going to make plays.
Vita Vea,
and they couldn't get anything on. And CJ Stroud has impressed all year. 1 interception on the season, and he's just really found his element. I think both you and I agree that he was the quarterback coming in. But when you look at the juxtaposition between what CJ Stroud did against the Buccaneers to what Bryce Young didn't do against the Colts, and you could start right there with the Colts. Just give a quick thought on that. How much of that game was the Colts defense playing better, and how much of that, from what I saw at least, was Bryce Young just making mistake after mistake after mistake? And it just seems like the progression is just so far between Stroud and Young right now.
Yeah, I definitely think it was a bit of both. Like I do think that the Colts interior D-line set the scrimmage line every play. Like DeForest Buckner was in every play, and they had no answer for him. He's an absolute game breaker. I've loved watching him play. This was also a defense that was missing Zaire Franklin, who leads the league in tackles too. So, and that's one of their biggest players in that unit, and he wasn't even there. So a lot of other guys stepped up. It was a great game for Shaq Leonard, which was really nice to see as someone who's loved watching him throughout his career and has gone through so many injuries. But the 2 pick six that he threw to Kenny Moore were mistakes. Like they were bad throws. And obviously it was costly. And when you look at that game, 27-13 is the score. You take away those 14 points, right? It's like the Carolina Panthers defense did what they had to do. It was just the fact that Bryce Young almost beat himself with that many, with those pick sixes. And yeah, I definitely think, we were talking a little bit about it last week. I really believe that the team was going to try and play well for Frank Reich. I still was very confident that Indy was going to win, but I thought this game was going to be a lot closer because of that. And they just didn't really have it from the get. And it never showed that fire to win the game. And Bryce Young just hasn't shown me anything elite in terms of what a first overall pick, what you want to see out of a first overall pick. Like, I've yet to see a play or a drive or something that's just been like, oh yeah, like I see the promise, I see the future. And granted, that O-line is not good in Carolina, but he's got weapons like Thielen, we were talking about last week, Jonathan Mingo, Hayden Hurst, like a lot of veteran presence there. Yeah. And the offense hasn't clicked, and they're looking down the barrel at another bad season without their first round pick, and there's going to be a lot of questions that are going to come out of Carolina as a result.
Well, and I was questioning the Frank Reich decision to begin with. I thought that, I think there's some coaches that are better as a head coach and some coaches that are better as a coordinator. I thought Frank Reich was a great coordinator, but when he took the job in Indy, I thought there was obviously everything going on with Andrew Luck and all the things that were happening, but he didn't really have a really good say with the quarterback situations, from Jacoby Brissett to Phillip Rivers. But then he brought in his guy Carson Wentz and vouched hey. And the Colts gave up a lot for Carson Wentz, and it was just not a good experience. And there's a reason why Carson Wentz isn't in the league as a backup right now. He just doesn't have it right now. And the Texans to the Panthers, because that's really what I'm looking at right now from that perspective. The Texans do have a better line. They've got Laramie Tunsil, they got Shaq Mason, two really good guards, right? And then you look at what the Panthers have, and they don't have the offensive line. But you can make an argument that the weapons are pretty much more or less the same, with Houston maybe having a little bit more. But what I really like about Houston, and I really think that what you said was hitting the nail on the head, is CJ Stroud's elevating the players around him. No one knew who Tank Dell was, the third-round pick out of Texas A&M, the 69th overall pick. This guy's a household name now. Everyone loves Tank Dell. Noah Brown I had seen with Dallas a little bit. I knew Dalton Schultz would be that, safety blanket, but he was making strong plays. And when getting the ball back 46 seconds and having to go all the way with score. Remember, this is a game they lost Kyer Fairbairn. There was a running back, a third running back. I want to get the name right. Dare Ogunbulala. He was the fourth string running back. He hit a field goal at one point. They were going for two because Fairbairn got
30 yards. Yeah, it was so clutch.
It was a must-see. The special teams coach for the Texans was going nuts. It was a really great and exciting game. And we've seen the last couple of weeks, if you would have told us prior to the week, what were those games of the week we've been, we went through them all. And it was Cleveland and Indianapolis, and then Houston and Tampa Bay. That's what's so exciting about NFL and this season alone. It's really, you can never expect the unexpected. And that's what we're getting. And, I just think that right now, to your point, and I'm just going to leave it there, we'll move on. CJ Stroud is elevating the players around him, and it seems like all these guys, Robert Woods isn't even in the picture. Damian Pierce is not really a big factor, but you're looking at Brown and Schultz and Tank Dell and Nico Collins really stepping up, and Stroud is just making the right place. And like you said, on that cover 2 throw on that final drive, hitting spots that most quarterbacks can't right now in the NFL. Seems like CJ Stroud, he's definitely looking at a first Pro Bowl appearance, and even in his first year. And I know there's a lot of good quarterbacks in the AFC, and maybe we'll save that topic for something else. But if I had a vote, I think I would put him in over a few other quarterbacks right now.
Yeah, it's crazy what a week does too, right? We were literally sitting here talking last week about how Bryce Young beat CJ Stroud and how big that was for his confidence, beating the guy that got drafted right under him and trying to prove that he's that first overall pick. And here we are a week later, CJ Stroud breaks the record for passing yards, and Bryce Young throws 2 pick six. So it's crazy, the NFL each week, but the craziest story that I think came out of this week has to be the Minnesota Vikings. And there's a lot to dissect here.
Great point.
You go in with the idea of a rookie quarterback starting in Jaren Hall. And for all intents and purposes, that opening drive was very strong. It looked very promising in what you saw to Jaren Hall. He gets the team to the 3-yard line, takes a massive hit. I guess it's his welcome to the NFL moment, but you never want to see that happen. You got to learn to go down. He'll have a lot of time in his career to figure that out. And in comes the guy who they had just traded for, Josh Dobbs, practicing on the sideline, trying to learn the cadence. He doesn't even know the names of his teammates. And we need to provide context here, because when you get traded in the NFL, you have to obviously come and learn into a whole new system. And if you're a running back, a receiver, you pretty much know what your position is. It's pretty much the same thing. As a quarterback, it is drastically different. So to come into that position is mind-blowing, and he put out a hell of a game, an absolute baller. Sim, I know you got a lot of things to talk about here. I can see you just so giddy to chime in. So what was your thoughts on the Josh Dobbs experience?
I think everything that Josh Dobbs has stood for the last couple of years. I mean, this guy has been bouncing around. And a lot of people forget that he was the quarterback for the Titans last year, and they had that must-win game against the Jaguars to get into the playoffs, right? And then the Jaguars won, but they struggled for most of that game. Like, Josh Dobbs kept them in there. This guy is a guy with an aerospace engineer. Like, this guy should be working at NASA. Yeah, and he's working in the NFL. Couldn't find his jersey in the Arizona Cardinals team shop. I hope that they have it in Minnesota, because this is a guy, and I don't know if you saw Seth, but Kevin O'Connell, the head coach, was saying to his team, he goes, "Hey, this is who he is. This is what we love about the NFL. And when he comes in from his post-game interview, let's show him the love." And they all went nuts for this guy. And that's what I love about football. And I didn't play it like you did, but you see it, and you see it on the sidelines, and you see it in the huddles, and you see it in the locker rooms, that brotherhood that unites them. And a win like that, I mean, he didn't know anyone's names. These guys were like, "We're taking you out for dinner. Like, we've got you covered. Like, anything you need." CJ Ham's like, "You're my guy." Like, the fullback, he's one of like the captains on the team. They came into this game, they were all wearing Kirk Cousins t-shirts. I don't know if you saw that before the game. It was really a nice touch. Kirk Cousins, actually, there's a video that was him throwing a ball with his kid and saying he's the only receiver I can throw to today, because he was sitting on his couch with a torn ACL. And watching his team now win 4 in a row. Well, now 1 without him, but 4 in a row. They've done these 4 games. They've gone at Green Bay. They've won at home against the San Francisco 49ers, at Chicago and Atlanta. So 3 road games, but all 4 of them had without Justin Jefferson. And Jordan Allison's really stepped up. He's got 7 touchdowns. He's up there in the top 2, top 3 for receiving touchdowns in the year. TJ Hawkinson's that reliable blanket, the guy that they traded for right at the deadline last year, right before the deadline. He's had a huge impact for them. Defensively, Danielle Hunter leads the league in sacks. There are so many questions about the Vikings, and they started off so slow, 1-4, and everyone was like, they're done. Like, this is the Lions division. Now they're in a playoff spot. Like, if the season ends today, they're in a playoff game with Josh Dobbs as their quarterback. And you're right, Josh Dobbs didn't know the guys on his team. He didn't know the guys in the huddle. There was a shot of him with the offensive lineman saying, "Okay, what are the Kansas and what are your names?" Like, who are you and who are you? You're the guard, okay, you're the tackle. So if I have to tell you to motion this, and he had this great quote. It's like, imagine you're studying for AP French, and you're just like studying for months and months and months, and then on the week of the test, or like the day before, you're like, no, it's AP Spanish, and you're like, I have to learn an entirely different language. And we've now seen it twice in 2 years where a quarterback has come in on a short week and has delivered a win. The only difference is that Baker Mayfield did it with the Rams at home in LA against the Las Vegas Raiders. This was on the road. Seth, what do you think about quarterbacks' ability to do that? Is it so much about the player itself, like a Josh Dobbs or last year Baker Mayfield, or the head coaches doing the play calling? What was your takeaway from Josh Dobbs, and how impressive from your standpoint was the way that he was able to rally, come into the game, because he didn't start like you mentioned, and then lead the Vikings to a huge win against the Atlanta Falcons?
Yeah, I think it definitely is a combination of the coach and the quarterback, because as a coach, and you mentioned it was the same with Baker and Sean McVay as it was to Kevin O'Connell and Josh Dobbs. As a coach, you have to be mindful of the fact that your quarterback doesn't know your entire playbook. So you've got to condense things. You got to think that much farther ahead in terms of the plays that you can actually call that he might be comfortable with. Also, keep in mind, Kevin O'Connell and Sean McVay are 2 of the younger head coaches in the league too. So they're maybe a bit more adaptable to something like this happening and being able to craft plays to their quarterback. And that's not an easy thing to do. But then it also has to be a quarterback that has a desire to win, that wants to come in and ball no matter what. When he's on that field, he's there for his brothers. And you touched about all of it, about the type of character that Josh Dobbs is and the resilience that he's shown in every game that he's in. No matter what team's in front of him, he's been competitive. He beat the Dallas Cowboys with an Arizona Cardinals team that no one saw coming too, right? So this is a guy who's just built for these moments. And when you combine that with a head coach like a Kevin O'Connell, like a Sean McVay, who's able to understand the type of player they are, know the person, know the game situation, and then make calls based off that, it creates what we saw, which is this miraculous moment where you're just rooting for this team no matter what to win because of the type of performance they're putting in. And in terms of what I saw, and the best way that I can even try and put my feet into his shoes, it's like, imagine going into a new job. You have this big presentation, this big pitch at the end of the week. You have had to learn some of it just, to know it, to get like acclimated with what your company's doing. But the person who is supposed to run it for your company gets hurt or is sick and can't make it. So you have to come in and just try and pitch this entire performance to this other company. And it's just, it's why we love sports. It's these stories that you never expect them to be written, and yet once you read them at the end of it, you're like, that's an incredible script. It's just phenomenal. And in a week where we saw so many different quarterbacks playing as well too, right? There was, what was it? I think 11 rookie quarterbacks just started in already this year. There's just a lot of different quarterbacks being put into these positions, but Josh Dobbs is definitely the story that was the most exciting to talk about. And I'm excited to see what he does with that offense moving forward when Justin Jefferson comes back. There's a lot of pieces there. There's a lot of excitement in Minnesota. So we'll see what happens.
And I just have one more question for you with Josh Dobbs. What's the more impressive stat for you? The fact that he went for 20 for 30 and accounted for 3 total touchdowns and 0 interceptions. He did have 2 fumbles and did take a safety. Or the fact that he averaged 9.4 yards per carry and led the team with 7 rushes and 66 rushing yards.
I would say, so this answer is twofold. What's more impressive is the fact that he went 22 for 32, you said?
20 for 30 for 158.
20 for 30.
Touchdowns, 0 interceptions.
That to me is more impressive, but for Vikings fans who have not had a legitimate RB1 all year, and Cam Akers is now done for the season as well, see that with Josh Dobbs is probably where you're like, okay, we've got a mobile quarterback. Like, that could provide more opportunities in those offense, especially when you bring in Justin Jefferson and you're now extending plays. That guy's going to get open. So if you're extending these plays, something that, Kirk Cousins isn't known to do, you might see a whole different look with this Vikings offense.
I agree. Justin Jefferson, huge catch radius. If he rolls out of the pocket, just buys him a little bit more time. You don't have to throw the ball inbounds. He can be 2 feet out of bounds and keep those 2 feet dragged in as well. So it's going to be exciting. Are the Vikings a playoff team? We'll have to be discussing that as the weeks go on.
Well, I mean, when you think about who they're competing with in the wild card, the Seattle Seahawks did not look great this week, going into Baltimore and getting trampled. It looked like the Ravens were eating Seahawks for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Maybe they're carnivorous at this point. Who knows? But this is now two games where Baltimore has gone up against one of the top teams in the NFC, a playoff contending team in the NFC, and absolutely destroyed them. It wasn't even a close game, and we saw it again this week. Sam, I know you didn't listen to my advice with your bets, and you took Seattle up plus 10.5. Plus 10.5, you would think would be fine, but it wasn't. This is all payback for when you brought up San Fran in our first episode.
Dang. Well, I guess I deserve it. I said to someone last week that the Ravens were my other team with the Chiefs as the legitimate contenders in the AFC, and then I bet Seattle to come in. And I don't know why, because like Seattle always has to travel the most distance coming from the West Coast. Then they have to play in the East Coast, and they did it fine when they played Detroit. And maybe it was in the Dome, or maybe Detroit's just not M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore, but they won that game. And so I just thought this game was going to be close. I thought this was a really, a point in the season for the Seahawks with the Niners on a bye to build on their lead in the NFC West. And they ultimately didn't show up. Like, they just didn't. And I think there's two things that stood out for me, and they're both from the Ravens standpoint. Number one is Lamar could play a really bad game, which, like, and by all accounts, 21 for 26 is very good for 187 yards. He did rush 10 times for 60 yards, but they accounted for over 200 plus rushing yards. Their rush offense and that the way that they're being Patrick Ricard and the way they have that scheme, and I believe, and I just want to get the name right, Greg Munson, I believe, Todd Monken. So it rhymes, I guess. Todd Monken, who was with Georgia last year, it helped them win back-to-back national championships, implement an offense. And when a new coach comes in, there's always a new scheme to the offense. Obviously, they had this whole mentality of running the ball and everything like that, and that's really what their identity is. But now they're seeing some weapons on the outside really emerging. Odell Beckham on his birthday, should have known that as well. Definitely shouldn't have been him. 5 for 56, his touchdown, his best game with the Ravens. He didn't even get the touchdown pass from Lamar. Like, the game was over. They put Tyler Huntley at that point. And then I've been saying this for a while now, and I'll just emphasize it one more time. I think Roquan Smith is the best middle linebacker in the game right now. And I know there's arguments that people are going to say Fred Warner, and there's some other people that you can definitely say Darius Leonard used to be in that conversation. Definitely hasn't shown it.
Franklin.
Jack Leonard, Zaire Franklin. I guess, Darius Leonard's an outside linebacker, so I take that back. But I think what Roquan Smith does on a day-to-day basis and how he keeps everything, you only see him in the stats as 3 tackles, but the coverage he does for blocking guys, he can cover out a guy like Tyler Lockett coming on a crossing path. He can cover a Fed going down the seams. This guy just makes the right plays, and it's not the flashy plays that Fred Warner does coming in and speeding in. But you look at that team, and Patrick Queen and Jadeveon Clowney is having an impact. Kyle Van Noy, the former Patriot, had 2 sacks. They've got this really nice player, Odafe Oweh, who I've been watching the last few weeks. He's really stepped up, and he's had a real big contribution. And just looking at some of his stats, he has 2 sacks on the season, but most of his tackles are tackle for losses. That's the guy who's getting into the backfield, is getting pressures, and then you're getting interceptions from a guy named Geno Stone, another Geno. Geno got picked off by Geno, which I saw Tony and Jim Nantz say, but Geno Stone leads the league in interceptions. So defensively, they're, in my opinion, definitely in the top 5 from what they do from a capability standpoint and scheme-wise. And then running the ball, it seems like, if they can get a little bit more production on the outside, there's really no stopping them. And if Lamar's healthy, he's playing well enough, and they run the ball the way they did. I mean, they had a rookie running back, Keaton Mitchell, who was averaging like 32 yards per carry, it felt like. This guy was just insane. Came in when the game was pretty much over, but... And I'll just get you his actual stats. He averaged 15.3, but he had 2 rushes for more than 40-plus yards, 9 for 138. And this is a guy that they've really been counting on, but with the injuries to J.K. Dobbins and then Gus Edwards being Gus Edwards, 4 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, this guy really hasn't had time to shine. Now it's just another weapon for the Ravens to use. And I think, in my opinion, they're the number 2 competitor in the AFC after the Chiefs.
Yeah, they're definitely a team that's built to win and potentially beat the Chiefs. And, having Lamar Jackson in one of my fantasy leagues, he did apologize after because he didn't have the most glamorous stat performance day. And there's been a lot of touchdown vultures in the Baltimore Ravens offensive system, Gus Edwards being the main one these past 2 weeks specifically. But you mentioned he's been playing efficient. Now, has he been playing an MVP caliber? That's really up to debate. And I want to bring this up now because I think the topic of who the MVP will be this season is wide open. And yes, I want to pass it over to you because I know there's a few favorites here. And I think it's a fun little dialogue we can have of, our early favorite for MVP topic because, Lamar could be in that conversation.
Oh, he definitely is in the conversation. Yeah, we're going to be doing a little bit more betting segments moving forward. We haven't found a name. I thought maybe Sam Slant might be a good idea, but we're just going to go right into it and talk about MVPs and build off to, hey, it could be, this is Sam Slant. I like the alliteration. Lamar Jackson right now is in some betting, when we were using Bet365, he is the 3rd option on the NFL MVP futures. Patrick Mahomes plus 275, Jalen Hurts plus 300, Lamar plus 450, Tua plus 600, Joey Burrow plus 900, and Josh Allen plus 1,600. Those are your top 6. And then obviously your next best option that's not a quarterback is Christian McCaffrey at 25-1. And then Tyreek Hill at 50-1. But Seth, you're looking at it as well as I am right now. Lamar Jackson continues down this road. I mean, you look at some of their wins. We talked about Miami not having big wins. Baltimore's won against some really good teams this year. They beat Cincinnati. They beat Detroit. They beat Seattle. All these teams with winning records. Does that have a say in the MVP if you had a vote? And right now, I guess the question is, who is your MVP? Because to me, I think the obvious answer is Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts, but I'm almost leaning towards Lamar Jackson, even though his numbers might not be as flashy as those other two.
Yeah, it's such an interesting season right now because there's no clear-cut MVP, and I don't think Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts' numbers are reflective of their MVP caliber. And I think about when Lamar Jackson won the MVP in 2021, like his stats were insane, and he was doing everything on the ground and in the air. This year, he's just been like good. Like he has not had really a bad game. Yeah, I guess the Pittsburgh was his toughest matchup, but I mean, going into Pittsburgh,
balls that could have been caught that weren't. Nelson Aguilar, for example.
Yeah, even as the MVP, if you're putting the ball right in the receiver's hand and they're not catching it, that's a very good point. So I think the way that he's been playing, Lamar Jackson makes the most sense for me as an MVP. Statistically, it is hard to kind of rationalize that. I mean, Tua leads the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns. So maybe if he can find a way to win these big games as in the next half of the season, that will help him, get into that, like legitimately in that conversation. But you know what? The guy who you just mentioned him, the guy who I kind of think might make the most sense from in terms of what he does for his team that's an MVP is Christian McCaffrey. We haven't had a non-quarterback MVP since 2012 when I'm pretty sure it was Sean Alexander that won it. And I think Christian McCaffrey, look, he's got 13 touchdowns already. He leads the league in rushing. He's got 300 yards receiving too. Christian McCaffrey has done everything for the San Francisco 49ers. We talked about him having real estate in the end zone at 25-1 odds. It could be, I'm not going to tell you where to put your money into where to invest, but I think the way that he's playing, getting almost 2 touchdowns a game, if this trajectory continues where he'll get over 1,000 yards rushing, he'll get over, 500-600 yards receiving and close to 20 touchdowns, maybe even more. I think that's a legitimate conversation that needs to be had as him as the MVP, because this 49ers team, yes, their defense is stout, but he is the MVP of that offense, and he's the one scoring almost every time.
I think you're making very good points, and I think we'll talk about it in just 1 minute about the AP Offensive Player of the Year. Just to correct you, not that you were wrong, Sean Alexander did win a NFL MVP in 2005. There were 2 running backs since then, one in 2006 and one in 2012. AP was 2012. 2006 was LT.
AP, that makes way more sense.
But yes, there hasn't been it's become a quarterback award, and I think that's where I'll put my value pick and my sleeper pick at 9-1. I'm taking Joey Burrow. I mean, I'm watching him in that Sunday nighter against the Bills. We really didn't talk about it, but the mobility he has, and he showed against San Fran last week, and he showed again this week, that he didn't have at the beginning of the year with that calf injury. Clearly, whatever was ailing him over that bye week has really just changed around. T. Higgins was more involved. Jamar Chase was more involved. You take that guy out of the lineup, and I don't think the Bengals, and you could say that about anyone, but the Ravens are a good team still with Lamar Huntley. Christian McCaffrey, could they still be a good team? I mean, they've lost 3 in a row, but Eli Mitchell, they plug in a lot of players. They could even throw Deebo Samuel in. And if you take Christian McCaffrey, are they still a very good team, San Fran? I would say yes. But the 2 guys that I would say right now is 900 plus 900 according to most betting odds. Joey Burrow, I think he's really taking that step up. Slow start, but it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And then we talked about him already. 66-1. Talk about a great value. CJ Stroud. If he gets the Texans into the playoffs, and I know that's a very tough call, but with 1 interception, this guy, you look at what he's been doing this year. I mean, he is just having an amazing year. He's 7th in passing yards at 2,270, 14 touchdowns, 1 interception. The Texans, they're not far out of a playoff spot. They're 4-4. Bengals, Browns, Steelers, all 5-3, so they're a game out. And this week we have Houston versus Cincinnati, so one of those teams is going to remain in a playoff spot, or the other one's going to move up into a playoff spot. So this is very exciting. So I'm taking those two guys, and in that week 10 matchup coming up this week, it's going to be really exciting to see which one has a better game.
Well, it almost seems like the quarterback that loses this matchup is the guy you don't want to take for the MVP, and you want the other guy. Like, it seems like this is like the turning point, because if CJ Stroud goes ahead and beats Cincinnati, there's a conversation to be had. If Joey Burrow continues to play the way he has, Joey Burrow continues to play the way he has, you gotta start bringing him back into the conversation. So I definitely see what you're saying. I think Joe Burrow's numbers aren't there because of that slow start right now, but look, Joey B late in the season, that's when he shines. And as you mentioned it, he's looking vintage. He's looking primo Burrow right
Joey
now.
Burrow. Are you taking the over in the Bengals Texans game?
I might have to add some or take away some points.
Well, I'll tell you right now, the total is set at 48.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd have to take away some points on that. Let me shave some points. Let me shave some points.
Over or under 48? I'm going to go with the over in this one.
I'm going to go with the under.
Okay, we'll see what happens. Friendly wager. The other quick one that we're going to do is the offensive player of the year. You talked about Christian McCaffrey. He is the tie at the top at plus 137 with Tyreek Hill. A.J. Brown at plus 600. Then you've got Jamar Chase at plus 2,500, 25 to 1. I said Lamar Jackson. Jamar Chase, 25 to 1. Lamar Jackson, 28 to 1. And then you got Diggs, Stephon, obviously Jalen Hurts, 35 to 1 odds. Is there anyone on this list? You talked about CeeDee Lamb at 80 to 1. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 80 to 1. Is there anyone that sticks out with you, or is it just a two-horse race between Tyreek and CMC?
Well, look, I've made my case for Christian McCaffrey for MVP, and a lot of those points can be translated. Like, if he does win an MVP, I would take him for Offensive Player of the Year. But in this conversation, there's really one guy that I think is the most deserving, and that's Tyreek Hill. Like, what he's done, like, he's already at 1,076 yards. He's got 8 touchdowns, and you know, if it wasn't for the kind of year that he's having, then A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs are very much on that trajectory of what should be, you know, worthy of putting that money in. But what Tyreek Hill's doing, you even saw it in Kansas City. They just make him such a focal point of that offense, and he's always finding ways to, you know, either get the ball in his hands and make moves or getting open. And he's just so fun to watch. I'm really hoping he becomes the first player to get to 2,000 yards. He definitely has that ability. He's got a few other massive games ahead of him in terms of just the numbers that I'm sure he's going to put up. And there's just no sign of stopping him. Even when you put a cornerback and blanket him with a safety, his speed is just unmatched. And so I think it's, for me right now, I'd put my money on Tyreek Hill.
I think so too. And I think that there is a part of me that thinks that if it comes down to a touchdown record and 2,000 yards, that I think that they should share the award. And I think right now they're sharing at the top with plus 137. I will say what A.J. Brown has been doing, he's not that far off. I mean, you look at how many yards Tyreek has, 1,076 over the first 9 games or first 9 weeks. I mean, A.J. Brown's over 1,000 yards already. I mean, there's a chance that there could be 2 guys who do it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that both of them will get there, but there is a chance with what's remaining. You know, just looking at some of the other options, you know, again, and there's nothing really that sticks out on like the second page or the third page. Although we were both shocked to see that Desmond Ridder had the same odds to win Offensive Player of the Year as Jamar Chase, Derrick Henry, Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, Nick Bosa, Kenny Pickett's there, Bijan Robinson. Like, I don't bet that. Josh Dobbs has better odds than all those guys, by the way, just to throw it out there. I mean, it's really a 2-horse race. And I think that when you look at it, Kelsey's just not been consistent. Jalen Hurts, Stephon Diggs, I think those guys probably a little bit short. I think it's those three guys. I think unless Jamar Chase just starts popping off for 200 yards, but I can make the argument for those three, and each one of those three are deserving. And I agree with you. I think Tyreek has it, in my opinion, as of right now. But if Christian McCaffrey scores a touchdown in the last final, 8-9 games of the year, and he's over 25, 26 games with a total touchdown, it'll be hard to bet against that as well. So I think you can lay your money on either one of those two, and you'd be in good shape.
Yeah, it will definitely be fun to watch and to keep an eye on as these weeks continue. But as we wrap up this episode, our 2-minute drill, we're going into it. And for this 2-minute drill, we're going to be talking about the Arizona Cardinals and the New York Giants. And you're asking us, why are you talking about two teams that are garbage? Because they are. They're bottom in the league. They haven't looked good. They just came off terrible games as well. But where we want to focus this conversation, we're each going to kind of provide our points, is that both these teams just put a lot of money into a franchise quarterback, and both these teams could be looking at drafting a quarterback. So making the case for the New York Giants, Sam, we're going to start you in 2 minutes on the clock. Should the New York Giants abort ship on Daniel Jones and draft a quarterback this upcoming draft? Maybe it's Caleb Williams. Maybe it's Drake May. Let's start the clock. Going with you. Start the drive.
Oh, 100%. That's it. That's all I need to say. That was a quick 90-yard pass right off the bat. There's no question. I mean, New York is built for Caleb Williams. I mean, this is a guy who can go to New York. I mean, we've seen guys like Justin Togg and we've seen guys like Victor Cruz still doing Subway commercials. And New York is such a huge market. You bring in a guy like Caleb Williams. I'd obviously hate to see it inside the NFC East and see him facing the Cowboys twice a year. But Daniel Jones and paying that contract was a mistake for the get-go. He won one playoff game, and people might say his time was up and he deserved to get paid, but it was clear that Saquon Barkley was the guy who should have got paid. And obviously, it's been unfortunate. You never want to see a guy go down. Kyler Murray went down. They paid him a lot of money. Now he's potentially coming back this week. Could be week 11. His season's not written off yet, but both of these two teams are looking at a first overall pick potentially. And I think for the Giants, it makes the more sense to hit a reboot, hit a restart, let Brian Daboll start fresh. He's a smart guy. Daniel Jones is limited, and he just hadn't looked good all year. It seemed like he took a step back, and then another step back, and another step back. And now with his ACL, he's going into probably playing week 11 next year. So I don't know what that does for him or who will want to take his contract. But if there's an option to get a guy like Drake May or Caleb Williams, I think New York, you abort ship. Daniel Jones will find work elsewhere, and you focus on one of those two guys as your quarterback moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's definitely valid. And look, these are very, very highly touted prospects, and Caleb Williams has been looked at as what could be a generational talent, the way that people are talking about him, besides the fact that he cried after his game against Washington. You take that away, what he does on the field, he cares. Yeah, no, I'm just saying a lot of people had ridicule about that. I'm not one of them. I don't think you are either.
No.
I'm going to take a different approach with the Arizona Cardinals. As much as it would be great to start fresh with a new rookie quarterback, getting rid of that contract that you gave Kyler Murray, no one else is gonna take it. You're almost kind of stuck with him. You kind of hope that he can maybe have some type of resurgence. He's going to be coming back, and I think it's this week or the next week. So maybe you kind of, at least we got to wait to see what he shows us on the field after his injury. But when you have a head coach that's defensive minded and then you bring in a rookie quarterback, I don't think that always meshes well. I think that's a very hard, I say that, but then again, here we are, Houston Texans, CJ Stroud looked great. I just find that, I think DeMeco Ryans, where I view DeMeco Ryans to Jonathan Gannon, is a little different in how I view them as coaches, but I just think that's a very challenging thing to bring in a rookie quarterback. And look, this is a team with a lot of holes. You're going to have two potentially top 10 picks because you also have the Houston Texans pick, which, again, obviously this was a great week, but I don't know if I believe that they're a playoff team. I know you made the points about CJ Stroud. That's just my thoughts. And you can seriously revamp your team with those two picks. Maybe you bring in Marvin Harrison Jr., and now you have this incredible talent to pair with Kyler Murray. And then your other player you can bring in to reinforce the offensive line. So I'm going to say if you're the Arizona Cardinals, you kind of have to hold off at least for another year. I know that's going to be hard with the type of quarterback talent that we have, but to have Kyler Murray's contract be there for your bench is just going to be a waste for your organization. So that's our 2-minute drill. It'll be very interesting. These are two teams that I think are progressively finding their way closer to that first overall pick, the way the season's going, especially with Daniel Jones out the rest of the year. So it's not looking good for the Giants. The Cardinals, you're getting Kyler Murray back. Maybe you'll have some glimmer of success with him, but it might be a little too late for that.
Well, and one final point, the Cardinals right now, 32, or they're in line to get the first overall pick. They're the 32nd team was what I was trying to say. The Giants are the 5th in the spot right now. They get the 5th overall pick. If the Cardinals decide to want to go with Kyler Murray, they can get another big trade with the Giants, and the Giants could move up, and then the Cardinals could move down. A lot could happen, but right now you've got two teams that are not going to be in the playoffs. One of them wasn't really expecting to be in the playoffs. The other one was. And so that will be interesting to see what the Giants do. I think you made a very good point, but I think in terms of hitting a reboot, I think the Giants are more realistic in terms of making that reboot. And we'll be rebooting it all again next week with games from week 10, all the big highlights, the big ups and downs, the big storylines. And Seth, as always, another great week, another amazing thing. I can't wait to see what's going to happen this week, because if we get another moment like Josh Dobbs or something else like CJ Stroud, I mean, this is why we love talking about football, and I hope you feel the excitement and energy when you're watching it, because we have a lot of fun talking about it.
After further review, I couldn't agree more. That's the ruling on the field. So we'll look forward to that next week.
End it while you're on a high.
Unreal.